still mooning over that old thing? Isabella's voice, smooth as silk and just as cold, cut through the quiet joy of the room. She was already dressed, a vision in sapphire blue, her maid of honor gown looking more expensive than most wedding dresses. She gestured vaguely with a perfectly manicured hand toward the large, elegant preservation box resting on the chaise lounge, her lips curling into a smile that never reached her eyes. I suppose it's a quaint little tribute to the past. For a moment, I just looked at her, the familiar dull ache of her casual cruelty tightening in my chest. It was her specialty, making beautiful things feel small, making heartfelt sentiment seem like a foolish weakness. I chose not to answer, turning instead to the window. The morning sun was a soft golden promise, streaming through the tall arched windows, and the air was filled with the heady, sweet perfume of thousands of white lilies. I would not let her poison this day. After a moment of silence she clearly found unsatisfying, she sighed dramatically. Well, do try to be on time, Emilia. It would be a shame to keep 200 people waiting. With a final, critical glance at my silk robe, she swept out of the room, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume lingering in the air, a stark contrast to the pure scent of the lilies. Her words, meant to diminish it, only made the contents of that box more precious. It wasn't an old thing. It was my grandmother's wedding dress, my legacy. I could still hear her voice, raspy but warm with love, as we sat on her porch swing years ago. "One day, Emilia, my love," she'd said, her hand covering mine, "this will carry all my blessings down the aisle with you." She was gone now, but that promise was the most sacred thing I owned. For 6 months, I had made its restoration my private ritual. Evening after evening, I sat with it, my fingers carefully restitching the delicate seams, replacing every tiny pearl that had fallen loose over the decades. I wasn't just mending lace, I was mending a connection to my past, stitching my own hopes and dreams into the very fabric my grandmother had worn. The dress wasn't just a garment, it was a living piece of our family's history, a tangible blessing from the woman who had been my true north, a blessing Isabella could never understand. Taking a deep, steadying breath to push away the chill of her visit, I walked over to the box. My heart beat a happy rhythm against my ribs. This was the final step. This was the moment I would put on my past to walk toward my future. I lifted the lid, and the world stopped. For a long moment, my mind refused to process what my eyes were seeing. There was no scream, no gasp, only a profound, silent, and absolute shattering of the universe. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The dress was destroyed. This was not an accident. This was a violation, a savage, brutal attack. The delicate, century-old lace of the bodice had been slashed through with what must have been a knife, the cuts sharp and vicious. The flowing skirt was shredded into ribbons, hanging like weeping willows of ruined silk. And the pearls, the ones I had so lovingly sewn, were scattered across the bottom of the box and had spilled onto the floor, winking up at me like a constellation of tiny mocking tears. My hands began to shake, a tremor that started in my fingertips and spread through my entire body until my teeth chattered. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. My mind scrambled for an explanation, but there was only one. The coldness of Isabella's voice echoed in my ears, an old thing, a quaint little tribute. Someone had taken my history, my legacy, my grandmother's blessing, and they had ripped it to shreds. Just then, the door opened and Chloe breezed in, a bottle of champagne in her hand. Amelia, it's time for a pre-wedding toast. You won't believe how beautiful the—" Her voice trailed off as she saw my face. Then her eyes followed my gaze to the open box. The champagne bottle slipped from her fingers, hitting the plush carpet with a dull, muffled thud. Her hand flew to her mouth, her gasp sucking the remaining joy out of the sunlit room. Her horror was a mirror to my own, confirming that this wasn't a dream. This was a nightmare, and it was only just beginning. I don't remember walking down the grand staircase. The world was a blur of muted colors and distorted sounds, as if I were moving through water. Chloe's hand was a firm, grounding pressure on my arm, the only thing keeping me upright as she guided me through a sea of confusion. The elegant music of the string quartet had faltered and died. Now the air in the grand hall, once filled with lilies and joyful anticipation, was thick with whispers and the sharp, anxious energy of 200 guests who knew something was terribly wrong. Mr. Abernathy, the venue manager, a man who prided himself on unflappable professionalism, was anything but. His face was pale, his hands gesturing wildly as he spoke in a strained, loud voice to my father. "I don't understand it, sir," he was saying, his voice carrying across the hushed room. "We received the call not 1 hour ago, an explicit confirmation. I'm terribly sorry, but the entire catering order was canceled." He paused, looking directly at me with a pained expression. The call came from the bride's registered phone number. The whispers intensified, becoming a low, hissing tide of speculation. My head swam. My phone? I hadn't touched my phone all morning. Then Liam was there, pushing through the crowd toward me. The look on his face was not anger, but a deep, hollowed-out disappointment that struck me harder than any rage could have. He grabbed my elbow, his grip surprisingly harsh, and pulled me into a small alcove, away from the prying eyes but not the prying ears. "Amelia, tell me this isn't true," he said, his voice low and ragged. He held out his phone. "Just tell me what this is." On the screen was a string of text messages, supposedly from me, to an unknown number. They were sophisticated fakes, woven with intimate details of our relationship, twisted into a narrative of betrayal. "Liam's sweet, but he's just a stepping stone," one read. Another, time-stamped from the night before, was the final damning blow. "Don't worry, I'll get through the ceremony. Meet me at the airport chapel at 5. I'll have the money. We can finally be free." I didn't write these," I stammered, the words feeling clumsy and useless in my mouth. My mind was still reeling from the shock of the dress, and now this. It was too much. Liam's face hardened. "I didn't want to believe it," he said, the hurt in his voice curdling into accusation. "I swear I didn't, but Isabella came to me this morning. She was crying." He shook his head as if replaying the scene. "She said she couldn't stand by and watch me be deceived. She showed me everything." My gaze shot across the room, desperately seeking an ally, a friendly face, anyone. I found my mother. Her expression wasn't one of concern for me, her daughter standing accused and shattered on her wedding day. It was one of pure, unadulterated annoyance and public shame. "Mother, please," I begged, taking a step toward her. "You have to believe me." She looked at me, her eyes cold with reproach. "Why would you do this, Amelia?" she asked, her voice just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "After everything we've done for you, Isabella was only trying to protect this family from a scandal." The floor seemed to drop out from under me. Protect the family. The same words they always used, the words that meant protecting Isabella's perfect image at my expense. That was all Liam needed to hear. He took a step back from me, his face now a mask of cold decision. He turned and walked to the center of the hall. He raised his hands and the remaining murmurs died away. "May I have your attention, please?" he announced, his voice echoing in the sudden, deafening silence. "It is with my deepest regret that I must inform you. The wedding is off." A collective gasp swept through the hall. Cell phones began to rise like little black tombstones, their lenses trained on my public execution. I stood frozen, the heat of 1,000 stares burning my skin. My eyes, of their own accord, lifted from the crowd and traveled up the magnificent, sweeping staircase, and there she was. Isabella stood at the top, one hand covering her mouth in a perfect pantomime of shock and devastation. But for a single, fleeting second, before the mask of sisterly concern was fully in place, our eyes met, and I saw it, a tiny, almost imperceptible lift at the corner of her mouth, a glint of pure, unadulterated triumph in her eyes. It was a smirk, a victory lap in a single expression. In that moment, the crushing weight of the pain, the humiliation, the utter betrayal, it didn't break me, it compressed. All the shock and confusion and heartbreak crystallized into something new, something hard and cold and sharp. The tears that had threatened to fall evaporated, and a chilling calm settled over me. She had meant to destroy me. She had miscalculated. She had just given me a reason to live. As I stood there, a statue in the center of my own ruin, the flashes from the guests' cell phones began to pop like little bursts of lightning. Each one seared an image into my mind, not of the present, but of the past. It was as if Isabella's smirk had unlocked a filing cabinet in my soul, and years of carefully suppressed memories were now spilling out, one after another, sharp and clear. Flash, I'm 16. It's our shared birthday party. In the driveway, a brand new convertible sits with a giant red bow on the hood for Isabella. In my hands, I'm holding a $20 gift certificate to a bookstore. My mother leans in, her smile tight as she whispers, "Isabella needs it for getting around, dear. You just need to study." Flash, I'm 12. The sound of shattering porcelain echoes from the living room. Grandmother's favorite antique vase, the one she brought from Italy, lies in 1,000 pieces on the floor. Isabella is sobbing, pointing a trembling finger at me. I didn't do it. I wasn't even in the room. But her tears were more believable than my truth, and I spent the next month grounded, scrubbing floors, while she went to the mall with her friends. Flash, I'm 18. The acceptance letter from a prestigious university is clutched in my hand. The full scholarship a testament to years of sleepless nights and hard work. At a family dinner, I hear Isabella telling our cousins, her voice dripping with condescending pity, "Oh, it's a wonderful school, you know, for people who can't afford a real education." This wasn't a single act of war. I saw it now with a clarity that was terrifying. This was a lifetime of slow, methodical erosion. Every milestone, every joy, every small success had been systematically undermined and devalued. The shredded dress, the canceled wedding, the public humiliation, they weren't the start of the attack. They were simply the grand finale of a campaign that had been waged against me my entire life. My first contract was signed in a small, cozy coffee shop that smelled of roasted beans and cinnamon. The clients were a young couple, Sarah and Ben, their excitement so radiant it was almost tangible. After I'd walked them through my process, my multi-layered contingency plans, and my network of trusted vendors, Sarah had looked at me with sincere, trusting eyes. "We read the article about you online," she admitted quietly, "about what happened, And honestly, that's why we called you. We figured no one in the world would be more ferociously dedicated to making sure a couple's day is protected than you." Her words were a balm on a wound I didn't know was still so raw. They hadn't hired me despite my story. They had hired me because of it. When I slid the signed contract into my briefcase, the crisp paper felt heavier than any paycheck. It felt like validation. For the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of genuine pride. I was stirring my latte, basking in the quiet glow of this small victory when my phone buzzed on the table. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Liam. I almost declined the call, but a new, stronger part of me decided to face it. "Hello, Liam," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "Amelia, hi." He sounded tired, hesitant. "Listen, I know you have no reason to talk to me, but I had to call. I've spent the last few months doing what I should have done in the first 5 minutes that day. I hired a private investigator." There was a pause. The texts were fake, sophisticated, but completely fabricated. He traced the burner phone they came from back to a kiosk near Isabella's apartment. I said nothing, just listened to the clink of a spoon against ceramic in the coffee shop. "I'm so sorry, Amelia," he continued, his voice cracking with an emotion that was months too late. "I was a fool. I was a coward. I let them manipulate me. I want to make it right. I want to try again." The old me, the pre-wedding me, would have dissolved into a puddle of grateful tears. But that Amelia was gone. I looked down at the signed contract peeking out of my briefcase. I had built that. I had survived. I didn't need a savior. "No, Liam," I said, the words calm and clear. "You didn't believe me when it mattered the most. You needed proof. I can't build a life with someone who needs proof to trust me." I took a breath, then delivered the final closing of the door. "I wish you well. Goodbye." I ended the call before he could reply, a profound sense of closure washing over me. Just as I was putting my phone away, Chloe slid into the booth opposite me, her face a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She pushed her phone across the table. "You need to see this," she said. It was a screenshot from a popular society blog, a picture of Isabella, her hand held up to flash a diamond the size of a small planet. Her other arm was linked with a handsome, smiling man. The headline read, "Socialite Isabella Vance engaged to tech mogul Alex Davenport. A wedding for the ages expected next fall." The air left my lungs. The warmth from my small victory vanished, replaced by an icy bitterness. Alex Davenport. I knew the name. His company was one of the fastest growing startups in the country. Of course, Isabella had upgraded. As if on cue, my phone rang again. This time, the screen read Mother. I answered, a sense of dread coiling in my gut. "Amelia, darling, have you heard?" Her voice was effervescent, bubbling with a joy I hadn't heard since, well, ever, when directed at me. "Isn't it the most wonderful news? Alex is just a wonderful man, so successful. Your sister is going to be so happy." I stared blankly at the picture of Isabella's triumphant smile. "Now, Amelia," my mother's voice took on a chiding tone. "I know things were difficult, but it's been months. It's time to let bygones be bygones and be happy for your sister. It's the right thing to do, for the family." The coffee in my cup had gone cold. A familiar, suffocating pressure built in my chest. This was more than just a request to forgive. It was an order to erase my own pain, to validate my own destruction for the sake of Isabella's happiness. It was the ultimate insult, a fresh layer of salt ground into a gaping wound. "I have to go," I said, my voice flat. I ended the call and sat in silence, the noise of the coffee shop fading away. The pride, the closure, it all evaporated. All that was left was a cold, quiet fire. They hadn't just moved on. They were building a new, better version of the life they had stolen from me, and they expected me to stand by and applaud. A simmering rage, purer and more focused than any grief I had felt, began to rise. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. The news of Isabella's engagement left a toxic residue that clung to me for days. The simmering rage cooled into a hard, dense knot in my stomach. It was a constant reminder that while I was rebuilding my life one brick at a time, she was being handed a fully built castle. My company, born from that rage, became my sole focus. I channeled every ounce of anger, every bitter memory, into my work. And slowly it began to pay off. My first wedding for Sarah and Ben went off without a hitch. They were so thrilled they wrote a glowing review online, which led to 2 more clients and then 4. My reputation was small but growing, built on a foundation of obsessive diligence. One afternoon, while drafting a catering contingency plan in my tiny rented office space, a room barely big enough for a desk and 2 chairs, an email landed in my inbox. The subject line was simple: inquiry from the office of Eleanor Vance. The name sent a jolt through me. Eleanor Vance wasn't just a name. She was a local legend, a formidable businesswoman who had taken over her husband's shipping empire after his death and doubled its value. But to me, she was something more. She had been my grandmother's dearest friend, her confidant for over 50 years. I hadn't seen her since the funeral. Her assistant requested a meeting at Mrs. Vance's estate the following day. The proposed job was to plan an event celebrating what would have been her 50th wedding anniversary. Driving up the long, tree-lined lane to her home felt like entering another world. The mansion was a grand, stone edifice overlooking the ocean, its manicured lawns rolling perfectly down to the cliff's edge. It was a world of old money, of quiet, unshakable power. The same world my mother and Isabella so desperately aspired to. I was led not into an office, but into a sun-drenched library. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and in the center, in a high-backed leather chair, sat Eleanor Vance. She was in her late 70s, her white hair impeccably styled, her eyes the color of a stormy sea, sharp, intelligent, and missing nothing. "Miss Miller," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Thank you for coming." I sat, my portfolio feeling flimsy and inadequate on my lap. We spoke about the event for a few minutes. I laid out my initial ideas, my process, my crisis management philosophy. She listened intently, nodding occasionally, her gaze never leaving my face. Then she held up a hand, gracefully cutting me off. "Your proposal is sound. You are clearly competent," she said, the words a simple statement of fact. "But that is not the only reason I asked you here." She leaned forward slightly. "Your grandmother, Catherine, was my best friend. She was the strongest woman I ever knew. She spoke of you often. She said you had her same steel spine, hidden under a gentle heart." My throat tightened. "I read the news about what happened at your wedding," she continued, her voice softening but losing none of its strength. "I have also heard the subsequent news about your sister." She said the word sister as if it were a foreign object in her mouth. Catherine would have been incandescent with rage, but she also would have been immensely proud. Proud? The word escaped me in a whisper. "Yes, proud," Mrs. Vance affirmed, her gaze unwavering. "Because you did not crumble. You took the worst day of your life, the most profound betrayal, and you built something from the rubble. That, my dear, is the true Vance family legacy, the one your grandmother embodied, turning pain into power. It is something the weak and the entitled, like your sister, will never understand. Tears I hadn't allowed myself to shed for months pricked at the back of my eyes. It wasn't pity she was offering, it was recognition. She saw me, she saw the work, the grit, the will it had taken to survive. She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the endless ocean. I am hiring you to plan my anniversary event, but more than that, I am making an investment in my friend's legacy. She turned back to me, a flicker of a smile on her lips. I have a great many friends and business associates who are in constant need of someone with your unique skill set. I will make the introductions, the rest will be up to you. Walking out of that grand house an hour later, I felt transformed. The contract in my briefcase was for the largest fee I had ever commanded, but it was the least valuable thing I carried with me. I had come seeking a client. I had left with an ally, a powerful one. The lonely one-woman army I had been building suddenly had a general. And the battle I thought I had to fight alone was about to change dramatically. True to her word, Mrs. Vance's introductions were transformative. My small company was suddenly fielding calls from a level of clientele I had only dreamed of. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. I was so immersed in building my new life that I was almost caught off guard when my mother called. Her voice was softer than I'd heard it in years, laced with a hesitant, almost convincing warmth. "Amelia, darling," she began, "it's been too long. I was hoping you'd let me cook you dinner. Just the two of us, a chance to really talk." A part of me, the old, hopeful part I thought had died, flickered. A quiet dinner, no audience, no performances. Maybe this was it. Maybe she finally wanted to understand. Against my better judgment, I agreed. The moment I walked through the door of my childhood home, I knew it was a trap. The scent of roasted chicken was the same. The polished furniture gleamed under the same soft lights, but the dining table was meticulously set for 4. My stomach turned to a block of ice. "Amelia, you're here," my mother chirped, emerging from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron in a gesture of domestic innocence. Right on cue, Isabella and her fiancé, Alex, emerged from the living room. Isabella floated toward me, a vision of smug magnanimity, while Alex followed, offering a friendly, if slightly uncertain, smile. He seemed like a genuinely decent person, which somehow made the charade even more repulsive. He was not a villain, he was a prop. The dinner was a masterclass in psychological warfare. The conversation was a minefield of pleasantries, with Alex doing his best to find common ground, completely unaware of the toxic history simmering beneath the surface. My mother and Isabella, meanwhile, spoke in a code of veiled compliments and passive-aggressive jabs, all designed to highlight Isabella's perfect life and my supposed peripheral role in it. I answered in short, polite, non-committal sentences, a gray rock in their glittering stream of falsehood. Finally, after the plates were cleared, Isabella placed her hand over mine on the table. Her touch felt like a spider. "Amelia," she said, her voice brimming with rehearsed sincerity. "Now that we're all here, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." She took a deep breath, looking at Alex, then at my mother, gathering her audience. "Everyone makes mistakes, and I've forgiven you for the bitterness you held after your wedding was called off." My jaw tightened, but I remained silent. "And now," she continued, her eyes shining, I want to give you a chance to show the world that our family is whole again. Emilia, will you be my maid of honor?" The audacity of it was breathtaking. It wasn't a peace offering, it was a demand for my public capitulation. I was to stand beside her, smiling, and in doing so validate her narrative that I was the unstable, bitter one, and she was the gracious, forgiving victim. My mother jumped in immediately, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "Oh yes, darling, please say yes. It's the right thing to do. Think of the family's reputation." Alex, the well-meaning fool, chimed in. "I know you two have had misunderstandings," he said gently, "but family is the most important thing. It would mean the world to Isabella." All three of them were looking at me, their faces a mixture of hope and expectation. They were so certain I would fold that the crushing weight of their united front would press me back into my designated box. I calmly picked up my napkin, dabbed the corners of my mouth, and placed it on the table. I looked from my mother to Alex and finally to Isabella. "No," I said. The word was quiet, but it landed in the center of the table with the force of a grenade. Isabella's face crumpled instantly, the performance beginning on cue. "No," she whispered, her eyes welling with tears. "After everything, you're still so jealous, so full of hate." "I am not full of hate, Isabella," I replied, my voice as cold and clear as ice. "I am simply out of the business of performance." I pushed my chair back and stood up. "Thank you for dinner, Mother. Alex, it was a pleasure to meet you." I turned and walked out of the room, leaving the sound of Isabella's theatrical sobs behind me. I didn't run. I didn't storm out. I simply left their stage, and for the first time, I felt the indescribable lightness of no longer playing a part. The engine was off, and the silence inside my car was a welcome void after the cloying atmosphere of my mother's house. I rested my forehead against the cool glass of the steering wheel, my knuckles white from gripping it. The lightness I'd felt walking out the door was still there, but it was mingling with a familiar, weary anger. It wasn't just that they were cruel, it was that they were so predictable, so utterly convinced of their own righteousness. My phone, lying on the passenger seat, buzzed, the screen casting a pale blue light into the darkness. I glanced over, expecting a follow-up guilt trip from my mother. But the name on the screen was Liam's. My first instinct was to ignore it. We had said our goodbyes, but it buzzed again, a second message right after the first. Curiosity, sharp and unwelcome, got the better of me. I picked it up. The first message read, "I know you don't want to hear from me, and I get it, but I found him. The guy who helped Isabella with the fake texts." I sat bolt upright, my heart giving a sudden hard thump against my ribs. I read the words again, and then again. He found him. My thumb, trembling slightly, opened the second message. It was just as pathetic as you'd imagine. She didn't pay him what she promised. He's a freelance tech guy, some kid named Marco. He's furious, says she treated him like dirt, and shorted him $500. He's willing to talk, Emilia. He's willing to give you everything. I didn't reply. I couldn't. I just stared at the screen, at the name glowing in the dark. Marco. It wasn't a wave of triumph that washed over me, not yet. It was something quieter, colder. It was the feeling of a locked door swinging open in a dark room. For months it had been my word against theirs. I had my truth, but I had no proof. Now a piece of proof existed, a key. And it had been delivered to me, not by justice or fate, but by the one thing I could always count on from my sister. Her cheap, arrogant carelessness. She had built her perfect, glittering life on a foundation of lies. and she hadn't even bothered to pay the contractor. Sitting there in the enveloping darkness, the hum of the city, a distant backdrop, I felt a fundamental shift inside me. The scattered pieces of my pain and anger, which I had been painstakingly trying to rebuild into a new life, began to reconfigure themselves. They were no longer just rubble, they were becoming the components of a machine. A meticulous, cold, and logical plan began to form in the quiet corners of my mind. I was no longer the victim reacting to their attacks. I was about to become the architect of her consequences. The name Marco and the proof he represented was a secret I held close for the next 2 weeks. It was a cold, hard stone in my pocket, a promise of future leverage. In the meantime, I poured my energy into the Sterling account, the biggest client Mrs. Vance had sent my way. Mr. Sterling was a retired pharmaceuticals CEO, and the 40th anniversary party he was planning for his wife was the kind of event that could make a company's reputation overnight. We were in the final stages of the planning, a marathon meeting in my small office, to sign off on the last of the contracts. I felt a genuine thrill, a sense of accomplishment that was purely my own. The contracts, worth more than I had made in the entire previous year, were spread across my desk. Mr. Sterling was smiling, impressed with a last-minute transportation solution I had devised. "Your attention to detail is remarkable, Miss Miller," he was saying, picking up the heavy, expensive pen I had bought specifically for this moment. "You truly have thought of everything." He was about to sign when his phone, lying face up on the desk, vibrated with an incoming email. He glanced at it, a minor annoyance. Then his eyes scanned the first few lines, and the warm, benevolent smile on his face froze. I watched as a subtle change occurred. His posture stiffened. The smile didn't just vanish, it was erased, replaced by a neutral, unreadable mask. He picked up the phone, his thumb scrolling slowly. The silence in the room stretched, growing thin and tight. He placed the phone back down on the desk, meticulously aligning it with the edge, a gesture of someone regaining control. He did not look at me. "Mr. Sterling," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "is everything all right?" He took a slow breath and finally raised his eyes to mine. The warmth was gone. In its place was a cool, professional distance that was more terrifying than any anger. "Miss Miller," he said, his voice perfectly level, "my firm prides itself on its due diligence. We have partners who perform background assessments on all our major contractors." He paused, choosing his words with surgical precision. "I must apologize. It seems our initial assessment of you was incomplete. We have just received new information." The cold stone in my pocket suddenly felt very, very far away. He hesitated, a flicker of what might have been pity in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Miss Miller, but we've been made aware of certain circumstances surrounding your canceled wedding. Information regarding a history of emotional instability, and what appears to be a rather unhealthy obsession with your sister's upcoming nuptials." The pen lay untouched next to the unsigned contract. The air in my lungs turned to poison. He was quoting something. The words were too specific, too clinical. This was a pre-written character assassination. "That's not true," I said, the words feeling utterly useless. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding," he said, the platitude a slap in the face. "But my wife's anniversary is not an event I can afford to take risks with. I'm afraid we will have to terminate our arrangement." He stood, buttoned his suit jacket, and walked out of my office without another word, leaving the unsigned contracts on my desk like a funeral wreath. For a full minute, I didn't move. I just stared at the empty chair where he had sat. Then my phone rang. It was another client, a smaller account, but an important one. The bride's voice was apologetic but firm. They'd received an anonymous tip. They needed to reconsider. They were so sorry. An hour later, a third call came. Same story, different client. It was a coordinated strike. An attack not on me, but on my livelihood. On the one thing I had built from the ashes of the life she had burned down. Every lingering shred of doubt, every vestige of sisterly connection I might have harbored, every foolish hope for a future reconciliation was incinerated in a blast of white-hot fury. The pain was so immense, so profound, it went past emotion and became something else entirely. It became a cold, crystalline certainty. She didn't just want me to be unhappy. She wanted me to be erased. She couldn't stand the thought of me succeeding, of building something she hadn't approved, couldn't control. She wanted to scorch the earth so nothing of mine could ever grow again. I looked at the name on my phone, Marco. This was no longer about revenge. This was about survival. The fury had burned itself out, leaving behind a cold, clear purpose. The moment I hung up the phone with the third canceled client, I picked it back up and dialed Liam. There was no preamble, no emotional hashing out of the past. "Where can we meet him?" I asked. "An hour," he replied, his voice all business. "The Starlight Diner off the interstate. I'll be there." The diner smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, a perfectly anonymous purgatory for the transaction about to take place. Liam was already in a booth in the back, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He looked older, the easy charm he once possessed, worn down by a guilt I no longer had any interest in assuaging. I slid into the vinyl seat opposite him. "This isn't about us, Liam," I said, my voice flat. "This is a business arrangement." He nodded, understanding. "I know. Consider it the first installment on a debt I can never repay." A few minutes later, Marco arrived. He was younger than I expected, with the nervous energy of someone who spends too much time online and not enough in the sun. He clutched a battered laptop bag to his chest like a shield. He didn't make eye contact with either of us, his eyes darting around the diner as if he expected my sister to burst in at any moment. "She paid me to create the text threads," he began, his voice a low mumble. "Gave me details, phrases you used, stuff to make it look real. Then she wanted the catering canceled, the florist, everything, all from a burner phone, routed through a proxy to look like it came from your number." He finally looked at me, a flash of resentment in his eyes. "She said it was a prank. Then she shortchanged me and threatened me when I asked for the rest. She thought she was smarter than me. Big mistake." He opened his laptop. For the next 20 minutes, he walked us through it. He hadn't just saved the fake messages, he had saved everything. The original, unaltered data files. The email chains with Isabella, filled with her specific instructions and their timestamps. The IP address logs that traced her requests directly back to the Wi-Fi in her luxury apartment building. He transferred it all to a secure hard drive I'd brought, his movements quick and efficient. This wasn't about justice for him. It was about getting paid and getting even. The next piece of my arsenal came from a far more elegant and far more wounded source. Liam's investigation had unearthed the name of Alex's previous long-term girlfriend, a woman named Sophia, who had been unceremoniously dumped just a few weeks before Alex and Isabella became an item. I found her online, a graphic designer with a quiet but impressive portfolio. I sent her a simple, direct email. She agreed to a video call that evening. Sophia's face, pixelated on my laptop screen, was etched with a familiar pain. "She didn't just steal my boyfriend, Amelia," she said, her voice quiet but firm with conviction. "She dismantled my life, befriended me, learned my weaknesses, and then used them to drive a wedge between me and Alex." With a shared grim understanding, she shared her screen with me. She showed me an entire history of text messages between her and Isabella, a masterclass in manipulation. But then she provided the two critical blows. First, a series of texts showing that Alex had been funneling money from his company account into a private one Isabella had access to long before they were officially engaged, a fact he was likely trying to hide from his business partners. Second, a detail so perfectly, poisonously Isabella that I almost laughed. Sophia pulled up a photo from her social media, dated 1 week before my own disastrous wedding day. It was a selfie of her and Isabella at a charity luncheon. And on Isabella's left hand, half hidden as if by accident, was the enormous diamond engagement ring Alex would later propose with. She hadn't just destroyed my future, she had been test driving her own on the wreckage. That night, my office was quiet, except for the low hum of my computer. There were no tears, no flashes of rage. My mind was no longer a storm of emotion. It was a quiet, well-lit laboratory. I took all the evidence, Marco's digital breadcrumb trail, Sophia's timeline of deceit, the financial data, the photographic proof, and I began to assemble it. I didn't just throw it into a folder. I organized it, cross-referenced it, and built it into a seamless professional presentation, complete with a clear, damning timeline of events. I prepared it with the same meticulous attention to detail I would use for a $1 million event proposal. This, I realized, was the most important event I would ever plan. A public trial disguised as a wedding reception, and the guest of honor had no idea what was on the agenda. With the presentation complete, a digital dossier of a sociopath's greatest hits, there was one final piece of the board I needed to set. I drove to my mother's house in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon, knowing she would be alone. I didn't call ahead. I didn't want to give her time to prepare her defenses, to slip on the mask of maternal concern. She was surprised to see me, her face a mixture of confusion and guarded annoyance. "Amelia, what a surprise. Is something wrong?" "I need to show you something," I said, bypassing any pleasantries and walking into the living room where so many of my childhood humiliations had taken place. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I didn't list my grievances. The time for emotional appeals was long past. Emotion was a language my mother only used for manipulation, not connection. She understood facts, consequences, and public image, and that's what I had brought her. I took a sleek tablet out of my bag, placed it on the polished coffee table in front of her, and pressed play. The presentation began, its clean corporate layout a stark contrast to the ugliness of its content. First, the email from Isabella to Marco, outlining the prank. Next, a screen recording of the fake text message threads being constructed, with Marco's dispassionate voiceover explaining how he did it. My mother's hand went to her throat, but she said nothing. Then came the financial records Sophia had provided, showing the steady siphoning of funds from Alex's company into Isabella's account, starting months before their official engagement. The timeline on the screen was undeniable. Finally, the picture, Isabella smiling beside her friend Sophia, the engagement ring glittering on her finger a full week before my own wedding was destroyed. My mother began to shake her head, a low, guttural sound of denial forming in her throat. "No," she whispered. "No, she wouldn't. It's a mistake, a misunderstanding." "Look at the IP address logs, Mother," I said. my voice quiet but unyielding. "They came from her apartment. Look at the timestamps. Look at the ring. There is no misunderstanding." The evidence was too clean, too absolute. Her denial crumbled, replaced by the horrifying, ragged face of truth. She slumped back into the cushions of the sofa, her face gray. The sound that escaped her was not a cry for her favored daughter, but a thin, wounded wail of self-realization. A sob of utter, soul-crushing shame. "What have I done?" she whispered, the words dissolving into racking sobs. "Oh God, what have I done? I helped her. I stood by her. I blamed you." I let her cry for a moment, the sound echoing the hollowness I had felt for so long. There was no satisfaction in her pain, only a grim sense of necessity. This was the detox, the painful purging of a poison she had willingly ingested for years. Finally, I reached forward and stopped the presentation. I looked at the woman who had chosen a lie over her daughter, time and time again. "I didn't come here for an apology," I said, my voice devoid of malice, but filled with a finality that was absolute. "I came here to show you the truth. On Isabella's wedding day, this truth will be made public." She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wide with a dawning horror of the social annihilation to come. "I am giving you a choice," I continued. "You have spent your entire life protecting this family's reputation, its image. Now you have to decide what that image will be. Will you stand with the truth, or will you go down with the lie?" I left the tablet on the table, a silent testament to her crossroads. I walked out of the house, leaving her alone with the ruins of the perfect family she had sacrificed everything, including one of her daughters, to build. For the first time, the balance of power in our family had irrevocably shifted. I let a week of silence pass after the confrontation with my mother, a week for the truth to fester, for the terror of its consequences to fully bloom. Then I made the call. I chose a time in the late evening, picturing Isabella relaxed, basking in the glow of her impending victory. When she answered, I didn't give her a chance to speak. I pitched my voice to sound small, broken, the way she had always expected me to sound. "Isabella," I began, weaving a convincing tremor into the word. I was wrong." There was a beat of surprised silence on the other end. "Amelia, what are you talking about?" "The dinner," I said, letting out a small, pathetic sigh. "You were right, and Mom was right. I've been so bitter, so jealous of your happiness. It's ugly, I know. I'm so sorry." I could almost hear the preen in her voice as she took the bait. "Well, Amelia, it takes a big person to admit that. I appreciate you saying it. I know it's probably too late," I continued, pressing my advantage. "But if the offer is still open, I'd be honored to be your maid of honor. I want to be there for you. I want to prove to everyone that I can be a good sister." The satisfaction in her voice was a palpable thing. A thick, sweet poison she drank down without a second thought. "Of course, it's still open," she said, her tone dripping with magnanimous condescension. "I told Alex you'd come around. He's so good at seeing the best in people." For the next 10 minutes, I endured a monologue of her wedding plans. She gloated about the 6-tiered cake, the imported French champagne, the A-list guests who had RSVP'd. She was a general detailing a successful military campaign, and I was her willing intelligence officer. "It all sounds so incredible, Isabella," I said, my voice full of manufactured awe. "It must be overwhelming to keep track of it all. How are you managing?" "Oh, it's a full-time job," she bragged. "The coordinators are good, but you have to stay on top of them every second." Well, if there's anything I can do to help, please let me know, I offered. I want to make sure your day is as perfect as you are. Then came the crucial move. I've been thinking, as your maid of honor, I'd love to put together a little surprise slideshow of photos, from when we were kids. A sweet little tribute. To do that properly, I'd need to coordinate with the AV team. Could you maybe send me their contact info? And perhaps a copy of the final event schedule so I can find the perfect moment for it. Oh, Amelia, that's actually a really sweet idea, she said, genuinely surprised that I was capable of such a thoughtful gesture. Of course, I'll have my assistant forward you everything. Just make sure it's tasteful. Don't worry, I said, a slow, cold smile spreading across my face that she couldn't see. It will be unforgettable. As soon as I hung up, the broken, pathetic girl vanished. I was myself again, but sharper, more focused. The next morning, the email from Isabella's assistant arrived. It contained everything I needed, the minute-by-minute schedule, the blueprints of the ballroom, and, most importantly, the name and number of the head of the audio-visual company. I called him immediately. "Hi, my name is Amelia Miller," I said, my voice warm and professional. "I'm Isabella Vance's sister and maid of honor. She's asked me to coordinate a surprise video presentation for the reception. It's a gift. She's delegated the technical sign-off to me, so if you could please grant me administrative access to the projection system, I can get everything uploaded and tested ahead of time. I just want to make sure it's perfect for her." There was no hesitation on the other end. Why would there be? I was the loving sister, just trying to help. Within the hour, I had the keys to the digital kingdom. The horse was inside the city walls. Use arrow up and arrow down to select a turn, enter to jump to it, and escape to return to the chat. The day of Isabella's wedding dawned bright and painfully beautiful. The bridal suite at the opulent country club was a storm of controlled chaos. The air hung thick with the scents of expensive hairspray and even more expensive champagne. Makeup artists buzzed around, bridesmaids fluttered in matching silk robes, and a nervous energy crackled beneath the surface of the forced gaiety. And in the center of it all, I was an island of perfect, terrifying calm. I played my part to perfection. I was the reformed sister, the doting maid of honor. My hands were steady as I helped Isabella step into her designer gown, a cloud of imported tulle and hand-stitched crystals that cost more than my first 2 years of college tuition combined. I fluffed her train, I fetched her mimosas, I offered a constant stream of compliments that tasted like ash in my mouth, but sounded like honey in the air. "You look breathtaking, Isabella," I said, meeting her eyes in the ornate, gold-leafed mirror. And she did. She was the perfect bride, a flawless porcelain doll. "Isn't it perfect, Amelia? Everything?" she sighed, her voice filled with the deep, bone-weary satisfaction of someone who has always gotten exactly what she wanted. "Everything is perfect," I agreed, my voice a soft, reassuring murmur. But as my fingers, steady and sure, fastened the clasp of the diamond necklace around her throat, my mind was a world away from the bridal suite. I wasn't fastening jewelry. I was running a final silent systems check. Marco is in place. He had been hired by the AV company as a last-minute freelance technician for the event. He was in the control booth right now, a ghost in the machine waiting for my signal. Sophia and Liam are seated. They had arrived early, taking their seats in the third row of the grand ballroom, 2 quiet witnesses ready to see the truth they knew play out for an audience of hundreds. Mrs. Vance has arrived. I had seen her from the window. stepping out of her black town car like a queen surveying her court, her presence a silent, powerful endorsement of the justice that was to come. My mother is in the front pew. I had received a single 3-word text from her that morning. I am ready. For the first time in my life, she was not my adversary. She was a terrified, guilt-ridden spectator, waiting for the curtain to fall on the lie she had enabled for a lifetime. Everything was ready. Every piece was on the board. The pressure inside me wasn't a hot, chaotic rage anymore. It was a cold, contained, high-density charge, waiting for the circuit to be completed. Isabella turned from the mirror to face me, her smile a dazzling mix of triumph and pity. She placed her hands on my shoulders, her expression one of faux sisterly wisdom. "See," she said, her voice a low, confidential whisper. "In the end, everything goes to the one who deserves it more. All that struggling you do, it's just so unnecessary. You should learn to accept your place, Amelia. You'll be much happier." It was the final, perfect encapsulation of her entire worldview. The last drop of poison she had to offer before the vial was empty. I looked at her, at my beautiful, monstrous sister, and I smiled. It was a genuine smile, serene and full of a profound, imminent peace. "Oh, I completely agree," I said, my voice as soft and gentle as a prayer. "Today, everyone will get exactly what they deserve." The ceremony was a beautiful, hollow spectacle. I stood beside my sister at the altar, a smiling, supportive statue, as she and Alex exchanged vows they had written themselves, full of empty promises about trust and honesty. The applause that followed felt like a wave of static, meaningless and distant. But it was at the reception where the real performance was set to begin. The grand ballroom was a fairy tale of Isabella's design. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, bathing the 300 guests in a warm golden light. Champagne flowed, a string orchestra played, and the low hum of polite, wealthy conversation filled the air. My sister, the newly minted Mrs. Davenport, was in her element, gliding from table to table, a radiant queen accepting the adoration of her court. After the dinner service, the band leader took the microphone. "And now we'd like to invite our lovely maid of honor, Amelia Miller, to the stage for a toast to the happy couple." A smattering of polite applause followed me as I walked toward the stage. I could feel Isabella's eyes on me, her smile a mixture of pride in her own magnanimity for including me, and a faint, ever-present pity. I stepped onto the low stage, the spotlight warm on my face. I took the microphone, its metal cool and solid in my hand. I looked out at the sea of expectant faces. I saw my mother in the front row, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. I saw Mrs. Vance, who gave me a single, almost imperceptible nod. I saw Liam and Sophia, 2 ghosts from a past that was about to be avenged. "Good evening, everyone," I began, my voice clear and steady. I raised my champagne flute. "I'd like to propose a toast to my sister, Isabella, and her new husband, Alex, a couple so perfect, it almost seems like a fairy tale. Looking at them now, you'd think nothing could ever go wrong." Isabella beamed, lifting her glass to me in a silent thank you. Alex squeezed her hand, looking every bit the proud, loving husband. "We're taught to celebrate the future on a day like today," I continued, my voice taking on a new, harder edge. The smile on my face didn't waver, but something in my tone made a few people in the front rows shift in their seats. "But I think the past is just as important. The past teaches us about truth. And tonight, I don't want to talk about fairy tales. I want to talk about the truth." The room, which had been buzzing with conversation, grew quiet. Isabella's smile tightened at the edges. I gave a small, discreet nod to the back of the room, where Marco was waiting in the control booth. And in an instant, the 3 enormous projection screens behind the band, which had been displaying a tasteful monogram of the couple's initials, flickered to life. There was a collective gasp. It wasn't a photo of our childhood. It was a screenshot of an email. The recipient, Marco's freelance email address, the subject line, wedding prank. And on the screen, in crisp, undeniable black and white, were Isabella's instructions to cancel the caterer for my wedding. At the bottom of the screen, highlighted in a damning red box, was the IP address from which the email had been sent, with a map pinpointing its origin directly over her apartment building. The silence in the room was absolute. Then, before anyone could process the first shock, the screens changed again. This time it was a video. Marco's face, nervous but clear, filled the screens. "My name is Marco," his voice echoed through the ballroom's perfect sound system. "Isabella Vance hired me to fabricate a series of text messages to make it look like her sister, Amelia, was having an affair and planning to run away. She paid me to ruin her wedding." A low, horrified murmur swept through the crowd. I looked at my sister. The color had drained from her face, leaving a pasty gray mask of disbelief. Her champagne flute trembled in her hand. "What is this?" Alex whispered, his head snapping from the screen to Isabella. "Bella, what is he talking about?" Isabella's face contorted, the beautiful bridal mask cracking to reveal the raw panic beneath. She shot to her feet, her voice a raw, ugly shriek that tore through the elegant ballroom. "Turn it off! Turn that off right now!" But no one in the control booth was listening to her. They were all watching me. And as hundreds of cell phones rose from the tables, their small, bright screens turning to capture her meltdown, I knew the show was only just beginning. Her screams were useless, a shrill, desperate noise against the relentless march of the evidence. Before she could even form a coherent sentence, the screens behind me transitioned. Marco's face was replaced by the clean, damning lines of a bank statement. My voice cut through the chaos, calm and precise, like a narrator in a true crime documentary. "Next, we have the matter of finances," I said into the microphone. A new video began to play. It was the screen recording of my video call with Sophia. Her voice, gentle but firm, filled the room. "Isabella had access to a private account," Sophia explained, as the screen showed transaction logs. "Alex was moving money into it for months before they were even engaged. I think he was trying to hide assets from his business partners." Alex flinched as if he'd been struck. He stared at the screen, then at Isabella, a dawning horror spreading across his face. He wasn't just seeing a liar, he was seeing a co-conspirator in a fraud he hadn't even known he was committing. "And then," Sophia's voice continued, "there was the ring." The photo flashed onto the screens. Isabella and Sophia at the luncheon, the diamond on Isabella's finger, a week before she had destroyed my life. She was wearing his engagement ring before he'd even broken up with me, Sophia concluded. She wasn't just stealing my boyfriend, she was auditioning for his wallet. The whispers in the room became a roar of scandal. This was a language these people understood perfectly. Not just betrayal, but calculated, premeditated greed. Then a movement in the front row drew every eye. My mother, her face ashen and streaked with tears, slowly, unsteadily, got to her feet. She turned not to me, but to the room, to the hundreds of watching faces that represented the society she valued above all else. "It's true," she said, her voice shaking but carrying with the force of a confession. All of it, she's telling the truth. That single simple validation was the blow that shattered Isabella's last defense, but I wasn't finished. But my sister's greatest crime wasn't about money or lies or a stolen fiancé, I said, my voice dropping, pulling the focus of the entire room back to me. Her greatest crime was against family, against legacy. The screens changed one last time. On the left, a beautiful, sepia-toned photograph appeared. It was my grandmother on her wedding day, young and radiant in her classic lace gown. On the right, a stark, high-resolution color photograph of that same dress, slashed, shredded, and heaped in a pile of ruined silk and scattered pearls. A collective, horrified gasp went through the ballroom. This was a desecration, a sacrilege. I finally turned from the audience and looked directly at my sister, whose face had gone slack with a new, deeper terror. "You didn't just destroy a wedding, Isabella," I said, my voice now as cold and heavy as a judge's gavel. "You took the most precious piece of our family's history, the memory of the woman who loved us both, and you ripped it to shreds. You tore apart our grandmother's legacy, and you did it all for nothing more than your own sick, petty jealousy." That was it. That was the final, unforgivable truth. Alex rose from his chair, his movement stiff, his face a mask of utter revulsion. He looked at Isabella, the woman he had married less than 2 hours before, as if she were a venomous snake. He didn't yell, he didn't make a scene. He simply said 2 words, quiet but absolute. "I can't." He turned his back on her, on the wedding, on the entire farce, and walked out of the ballroom without looking back. The sight of him leaving broke whatever spell was holding Isabella together. Her jaw opened, but no words came out. A strangled animal sound of pure agony tore from her throat. Her knees buckled, and she collapsed to the floor in a heap of designer tulle and shattered pride, her screams echoing in the silent watching room. I didn't stay to watch the full implosion. I simply placed the microphone back on its stand, walked off the stage, and exited the ballroom through a side door into the cool night air. My part in their story was over. The fallout was swift, brutal, and very, very public. In the age of the smartphone, the wedding crash of the century went viral before the caterers had even started clearing the untouched plates. Dozens of videos filmed from every angle showed Isabella's shrieking collapse, my mother's public confession, and Alex's silent, final departure. For Isabella, the consequences were absolute. Alex's annulment filing was the least of her problems. His lawyers also filed a civil suit against her for fraud, citing the financial evidence I had presented. Her name became a punchline in the high society circles she had fought so desperately to conquer. She was no longer the brilliant socialite, she was a pariah. The last I heard, she had sold her luxury apartment to cover her legal fees and moved somewhere far away, a place where no one knew her name. The Miller family name, my mother and father's proudest possession, was irrevocably tarnished. The foundation of their marriage, built on the brittle mortar of public perception, crumbled under the weight of the scandal. My father, unable to face the shame, moved out. My mother, left alone in the wreckage of the life she had curated, finally did something I never thought possible. She started going to therapy. She began a slow, painful process of trying to rebuild a relationship with me. But this time it was entirely on my terms. And as for my company, it exploded. The story, now attached to my name, was the most powerful advertisement I could have ever conceived. I wasn't the unstable, jilted bride anymore. I was the woman who had meticulously planned and executed the most effective crisis in the city's history. I became a quiet symbol of resilience, of justice served cold. Clients didn't just hire me to plan their events, they hired me to protect them, knowing I understood, better than anyone, the value of a day without lies. The scales, so long tipped in their favor, had finally violently balanced. 1 year later, the setting sun bled across the horizon, painting the sky in strokes of soft rose and deep orange. The only music was the gentle rhythm of the waves washing against the shore. Liam and I stood on that quiet beach, hand in hand, surrounded by a small circle of people who were not just guests, but our foundation. Chloe, Mrs. Vance, a few dear friends, and my mother, her presence quiet and deeply felt. I wasn't wearing a priceless heirloom. My dress was a simple slip of ivory silk, one I had designed and sewn myself. It felt more precious than any ancient lace because it was mine, born not of the past, but of the peaceful, resilient present I had built with my own 2 hands. A few days earlier, a letter had arrived, forwarded from my office. The postmark was from a small town hundreds of miles away. It was a long, rambling letter from Isabella. It wasn't an apology, not really. It didn't ask for forgiveness. It was just a raw, painful accounting of her time in therapy, of the ugly truth she was being forced to confront about herself. It was the writing of someone just beginning the long, hard work of becoming a better person. I read it, and then I put it away. Her journey was her own. My peace was no longer tied to it. Now, as Liam slid a simple gold band onto my finger, I looked out at the endless expanse of the ocean. The last light of the day gilded the water, and a profound calm settled in my soul. I finally understood. A true legacy isn't a dress or a name or a fortune passed down through generations. It's found in the truth you have the courage to speak and the strength you find to survive it. It's in the forgiveness you choose to grant, not for others, but for yourself, for the peace you deserve. And it's in the quiet, unshakable joy of building a new life, your own beautiful life, from the ashes of the old.